Today we're talking about the Cuban Missile Crisis. This particular incident took place in October of 1962 over a span of about 13 days. U-2 spy planes took these photographs above Cuba showing a Soviet military presence in the form of vehicles, soldiers, and missiles. Those nuclear missiles were pointed at the United States. This map shows the effective range of the Soviet missiles placed in Cuba. As long as they were in place, the United States was under a continuous threat. President John Kennedy took an aggressive approach in dealing with this situation. He had the United States Navy use more than 200 warships to encircle or blockade the tiny island nation of Cuba, preventing more Soviet missiles or supplies from going into that nation. President Kennedy's strong response to the Soviet move was meant not only to protect the United States, but to show Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev that he was much stronger than Khrushchev had originally anticipated. Because of the fear of war with the Soviet Union, many Americans and citizens all over the world hoped for a diplomatic solution to this problem. The United States took their case to the United Nations, where they laid out information, including photographs, showing the Soviet Union indeed had placed missiles inside of Cuba, which the Soviet Union had repeatedly denied. Former Senator Adlai Stevenson pressed the Soviet delegate for an answer as to why the Soviet Union had denied they had placed missiles inside of Cuba. When the Soviet delegate responded that he would need time for a translation and Stevenson would have to wait, Stevenson replied that he would be willing to wait until hell froze over. While the United Nations was attempting to resolve this situation, Soviet ships were moving closer towards the American blockade perimeter, and it became increasingly clear that Nikita Khrushchev was not willing to risk war with the United States over Cuba. President Kennedy negotiated a deal whereby the missiles would be removed from Cuba in exchange for a promise of no invasion into Cuba. Also, a secret part of the deal stated that the United States would remove its missiles pointed at Russia from Turkey. President Kennedy's handling of the Cuban Missile Crisis won over many of his critics and showed that Americans would not back down from Soviet aggression. One other interesting incident or side note was that a hotline was installed between the Soviet Union and the United States to prevent further incidents such as this from escalating into potential war.